Imagine walking into your own bank to deposit money you've earned, only to end up in handcuffs before anyone even checks if it's real. You ever notice how life can flip in just a matter of minutes? One second, you're doing something ordinary. The next second, everything's out of your control. That's exactly what happened to a man named Marcus Ellington, a warehouse supervisor from Toledo, Ohio. It was a Friday afternoon, the kind of day where most folks are already thinking about the weekend. The sun was still high, people were cutting out of work early, and the streets around Monroe Street were buzzing with traffic headed toward the mall and restaurants. Marcus wasn't thinking about dinner plans or happy hour, though. He had something heavier on his mind. In the passenger seat of his old Ford Fusion was a cashier's check worth $10,000. It wasn't lottery winnings. It wasn't anything shady. It was money he'd gotten after selling his late father's car, a 1978 Buick Regal that had been sitting in his garage for years. That car was the last big thing tying him to his dad, and selling it hadn't been easy. He told himself the money would go toward a college fund for his niece, maybe fix up the house a little, but more than anything, he just wanted to do the right thing with it. So Marcus parked near the Fifth Third Bank branch he always used, grabbed the envelope, and walked inside. He didn't know that by the time he walked back out, people would be whispering, cameras would be recording, and his wrists would ache from cold metal cuffs. The bank was moderately busy. 3 people in line ahead of him, a couple of older women filling out slips at the side counter, and a young mom trying to calm a crying toddler. Marcus nodded politely at a security guard by the door before stepping into line. He had been here dozens of times before. His checks from work, his mortgage payments, even the time he refinanced his car loan, it all went through this same branch. When it was finally his turn, he stepped up to the counter where a teller named Janet Lewis, maybe in her late 20s, greeted him with the standard, "Hi, how can I help you today?" Marcus placed the envelope on the counter. "I'd like to deposit this check," he said, his voice calm, steady. Janet opened the envelope, her eyes scanning the numbers. 10,000. She looked back at Marcus, then down at the check again. He could feel her gaze lingering just a little too long. "Do you have an account with us?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied. "Been banking here for about 11 years now." She nodded, typed something into her computer, and asked for his ID. Marcus slid his driver's license across. She picked it up, glanced at it, then back at the check. For a moment, Marcus thought nothing of it. Maybe she was just double-checking. But her expression tightened slightly, almost like she was trying to solve a puzzle. She glanced toward another teller, then leaned slightly back in her chair. "Excuse me just a second," she said. Marcus watched her walk over to a man in a suit, likely the branch manager, and whisper something. The man's eyes flicked quickly toward Marcus, then toward the check in her hand. Something felt off. Marcus stood there, hands in his pockets, waiting. Behind him, he could feel the line growing longer. He could hear the impatient sigh of the man standing behind him. The manager approached, his tone polite but stiff. "Mr. Ellington, can I ask where you received this check?" Marcus answered without hesitation. "From the sale of my father's car. A man in town bought it, gave me this cashier's check." The manager gave a tight smile, nodded, but didn't seem satisfied. He told Marcus they'd need a moment to verify. That's when Marcus noticed the teller pressing something under her desk, a small, discreet motion. His chest tightened. He'd been in plenty of banks before, and he knew what that button was for. But he didn't raise his voice. He didn't panic. He just stood there, staring at the check that was supposed to bring him peace, but was now about to bring him something entirely different. But the real storm didn't hit until he heard the sound of sirens getting closer. Before those sirens even reached the parking lot, you've got to understand who Marcus Ellington really was. See, some people get painted with assumptions the second they walk into a room, but Marcus was the kind of man whose whole life was proof of steady effort, quiet strength, and responsibility. Marcus grew up on the east side of Toledo, raised mostly by his father, Walter Ellington, after his mom passed when he was only 12. Walter wasn't a wealthy man. He worked long shifts at a steel plant until his knees and lungs gave out. But he taught Marcus the value of work and the importance of doing right, even when no one's watching. By the time Marcus was 18, he'd already taken on jobs to help keep the house running. He stacked boxes in warehouses, unloaded trucks in the freezing cold, and never once complained. He used to joke with his dad, saying, "As long as I've got 2 hands and a back that works, we'll be all right." And Marcus stuck to that. At 38, he was now a supervisor at a local distribution center responsible for over 20 employees. Folks respected him because he wasn't the kind of boss who barked orders. He worked alongside his team, sweated with them, stayed late if the job needed finishing. At home, his world was smaller but no less meaningful. He had a modest two-bedroom house near Detroit Avenue, with a patchy yard he kept trying to improve every summer. He lived alone, but his door was never closed to family. His sister Denise dropped by with her daughter Kayla almost every weekend. Kayla was 10 now, bright-eyed and full of questions, and Marcus saw her as the future. He wanted her to have chances he never did. That's why selling his father's Buick wasn't just about letting go of a piece of history. It was about building something for her future. But Marcus also carried scars, ones you couldn't see. He remembered the times he'd been pulled over for driving too slow in a neighborhood that wasn't his, or the time he'd been followed through a store like he was about to pocket something. Each time, he swallowed his frustration, choosing patience over anger. His father used to tell him, "Son, you don't have the luxury of blowing up. They're already waiting for you to mess up." Those words sat in his chest like a stone, and he carried them everywhere. So, standing in that bank, Marcus wasn't just a man with a check. He was a man with decades of sweat, sacrifice, and discipline behind him. He was a man who'd done everything by the book, everything the right way. And still, here he was, being stared at like a problem. If you'd been there, you'd have seen the calm on his face, but you'd have missed the storm building under it. Inside, Marcus was thinking about Kayla, about what she'd say if she ever saw her uncle being treated like a criminal for just trying to deposit money. He thought about his father, about how Walter would have clenched his jaw and muttered something under his breath about things never changing. Marcus adjusted his stance at the counter, glanced at his watch, and told himself to stay patient. He had nothing to hide. He had every right to be there. He told himself the truth would clear things up, just like it always should. But life doesn't always move the way it's supposed to, and truth doesn't always come first. Because before Marcus could explain much more, those sirens he'd heard outside grew louder, and they were coming straight for him. The sirens were faint at first, just a hum behind the glass doors, but Marcus caught them before anyone else did. He didn't shift his weight, didn't twitch, didn't say a word. He just listened. Inside the bank, everything still looked ordinary. The woman with the toddler was now bouncing her child gently on her hip, whispering to calm her down. The older ladies at the counter were gossiping about a neighbor's house being remodeled. To them, nothing was wrong, but Marcus knew better. He looked at the teller, Janet, who was back at her station now, nervously clicking her pen against the desk. She glanced at him once, then quickly back to her screen. The branch manager stood a few steps away, pretending to check something on his tablet, but stealing obvious looks in Marcus's direction. Marcus finally broke the silence. "Everything all right?" The manager didn't answer right away. He gave a polite smile that felt like it had been rehearsed. "Yes, sir. We're just working on verifying the check." "It'll only take a moment." Marcus nodded, but his gut told him this wasn't just about verification. He knew the look in their eyes, the silent conversations happening without words. The sirens grew closer now, and the man in line behind Marcus noticed. He leaned forward, annoyed. "Hey man, are you almost done? Some of us gotta be somewhere." Marcus turned his head slightly, his voice low but steady. "I'm just trying to deposit my check, same as you trying to handle your business." "Won't be long." The man muttered something under his breath, but Marcus didn't bite. He had bigger problems to think about. Outside, the sirens stopped. The sound cut off so sharply it made Marcus's chest tighten. He could picture squad cars pulling up, lights flashing, tires screeching against pavement. The security guard by the entrance shifted on his feet. He tapped his radio once, glanced toward the glass doors, then toward Marcus. Marcus exhaled slowly. "So, this is what we're doing," he whispered under his breath. And just like that, the doors burst open. Two uniformed officers walked in first, one tall, heavy-set with a shaved head, the other slimmer, with dark hair tucked under his cap. Behind them, a third officer lingered near the door, scanning the room as if expecting danger. The room froze. Conversation stopped. The mother pulled her child close, the older women turned around wide-eyed, and even the man who had been rushing Marcus a moment ago took a cautious step back. The heavy-set officer's voice carried through the room. "Sir, can you step away from the counter?" Marcus's heart thudded, but he didn't move right away. He raised his hands slightly, not all the way, just enough to show he wasn't holding anything. Officer, what seems to be the problem? Step away from the counter, the officer repeated, this time with sharper emphasis. Marcus looked at Janet, then at the manager. Their faces were pale, uneasy, but they said nothing. No explanation, no defense, just silence. So Marcus obeyed. He stepped back slowly, keeping his hands visible. His voice was calm, measured, almost too calm. I came in here to deposit a check. That's it. The slimmer officer spoke next, his tone more controlled. We just need to ask you a few questions, sir. Marcus nodded once, even though his mind was screaming. Questions weren't the issue. Questions he could handle. But the way this was unfolding told him the answers might not even matter. The manager cleared his throat awkwardly, like he wanted to add something but couldn't bring himself to. Instead, he shuffled papers on his desk, avoiding Marcus's eyes. Every second stretched like an hour. Marcus thought of his niece Kayla again. What would she think if she saw this? Her uncle being pulled aside like some thief just for bringing money into a bank. But before he could even finish the thought, one of the officers reached for his wrist. The officer's hand gripped Marcus's wrist, firm but not yet forceful. Marcus didn't resist. He kept his voice calm, steady enough for everyone in the bank to hear. Sir, I told you, he said, locking eyes with the slimmer officer. This is a cashier's check from the sale of my father's car. My account has been here over a decade. You can check my records right now. The heavyset officer wasn't listening. We'll sort that out outside, he said. Let's go. And with that, the tension in the room thickened. Marcus glanced at Janet, the teller who had first taken his check. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tight. She finally spoke, her voice shaky. It didn't look right. Marcus tilted his head slightly. Didn't look right? What part of it? Janet looked toward the manager for backup, but he stayed silent, adjusting his tie instead of answering. The amount, she muttered, her words almost swallowed by the silence. It's unusual. And sometimes checks like this, they're fake. Marcus let out a slow breath, trying to keep his anger from spilling out. You've got my ID. You've got my account history. 11 years of deposits. Not once have I caused a problem here. You didn't think to ask me one more question before calling them. He nodded toward the officers. You just assumed. The words hung heavy in the air. The older women near the side counter exchanged glances. Even the impatient man behind Marcus now looked uneasy. Janet fiddled with her pen, unable to meet his eyes. The manager finally stepped in, his voice measured. Sir, you have to understand. Banks are under strict protocols. When a large check comes in, we're trained to look for red flags. $10,000 is considered a threshold. Marcus's voice sharpened. So the threshold is me? My skin? My clothes? My face? That question cut deeper than anything else. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was plain, direct, undeniable. For a moment, the bank was silent except for the whimper of the toddler in the corner. The slimmer officer, the one who seemed more thoughtful, studied Marcus carefully. He hadn't put cuffs on yet, though his partner's hand twitched as if eager to. Sir, the slimmer officer said slowly, if what you're saying is true, you'll have your chance to explain. But right now, we need you to step outside. Marcus glanced around the room. Every pair of eyes was on him, some judgmental, some sympathetic, all waiting to see what he would do. He straightened his shoulders, speaking calmly again. I'll go. But I need you all to see what just happened here. I walked in to deposit money from selling my father's car, and before I could finish explaining, I was treated like a suspect. Not because of the check, because of me. Janet shifted uncomfortably. The manager cleared his throat again, but didn't argue. The weight of Marcus's words sat heavy in the air, pressing on everyone present. The heavy-set officer tugged at Marcus's wrist again. Outside. Now Marcus didn't fight. He let them guide him toward the doors, his mind replaying every second. He thought of the Buick, the hours he and his father had spent under its hood. He thought of Kayla, who'd asked him once why people sometimes looked at her funny in the store. He thought of how he'd promised her the world would be fair if she worked hard enough. But here he was, standing as proof that sometimes fairness had nothing to do with it. And as those glass doors swung open, the flashing lights outside made it clear this was about to get much worse. The air outside the bank was buzzing with flashing red and blue. 2 squad cars sat angled across the entrance like barricades, lights pulsing against the brick walls of the strip mall. A third car idled near the curb, its engine running as if they were ready to take someone away. The moment Marcus stepped outside, the heat of the afternoon hit him, but it wasn't the sun that made sweat form on his forehead. It was the weight of all those eyes. Shoppers leaving the nail salon next door stopped and stared. A man carrying takeout paused mid-step, his phone already out, recording. Someone whispered, "What's he done?" The heavyset officer tightened his grip on Marcus's wrist. "Hands behind your back." Marcus's voice stayed level. "Officer, I haven't committed a crime. I came here to deposit my own money. That's all." "You can explain that downtown," the officer shot back, pulling the cuffs from his belt. The metal snapped around Marcus's wrists, cold and unforgiving. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. "Wait," the slimmer officer said, his tone less aggressive. He studied Marcus, then turned toward the bank doors. "Did the manager confirm the check was fraudulent?" There was no clear answer. Janet stood frozen in the doorway, her face pale while the manager hovered behind her. Neither one spoke up. Marcus seized the silence. He turned his head toward the slimmer officer. "You see that? They don't even know. They just assumed. And now I'm in cuffs." For a second, the slimmer officer didn't respond. His eyes shifted between Marcus, the manager, and the small crowd forming near the parking lot. He could feel the tension building, could sense how wrong this looked, but his partner wasn't slowing down. The heavy-set officer pushed Marcus gently but firmly toward the nearest squad car. "Sir, you're being detained for further questioning." Marcus clenched his jaw, then forced himself to speak. "Detained for what? Carrying a check with my name on it? For selling my father's car? Or is it for looking like me while doing it?" That question sliced through the noise. The man holding the takeout lowered his phone slightly, his face shifting from curiosity to discomfort. A woman whispered to her friend, "That's messed up." The slimmer officer finally spoke up. "Let me see the check." The manager hesitated, then reluctantly stepped forward with the envelope. The officer opened it, studied the cashier's check closely, and frowned. It was legitimate, at least at first glance. Watermark intact, routing numbers clear. Marcus caught his eye. "That's because it's real. Because I'm telling the truth." Still, the heavy-set officer kept Marcus pressed against the car. His voice was gruff, impatient. "We'll confirm it at the station." Marcus exhaled, the frustration finally cracking through. "You don't even want to hear me. You want me to be guilty so bad, you're not even listening." The slimmer officer shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't intervene yet. The silence between him and his partner was heavy, charged, like a disagreement waiting to spark. A boy, maybe 14, stood on the sidewalk holding his skateboard. He watched Marcus intently, wide-eyed, as if memorizing every second. Marcus noticed him and felt a wave of shame, not for himself, but for what this boy was seeing. "Sir," Marcus said softly, his voice directed at the slimmer officer now. "You can cuff me, you can drag me out of here. But at least give me the chance to speak. Don't just let this happen without asking why." The slimmer officer didn't answer right away. His hand rested on his holster, but his eyes lingered on Marcus longer than before. He seemed torn, caught between procedure and conscience. But before he could decide, the heavy-set officer opened the squad car door with a hard pull, ready to force Marcus inside. The heavy-set officer shoved the squad car door open, the hinges groaning, as if they too didn't want to be part of this. Marcus stood still, his hands cuffed behind him, his chest tight with frustration. The metal of the cuffs dug into his skin, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm telling you the truth," Marcus said, turning his head just enough to be heard by both officers. "That check is real. It came from the sale of my father's car. You can call the buyer right now, his name's on the paperwork. I've got every document you'd need." The slimmer officer held the check in his hand, examining it under the light. His brow furrowed deeper the longer he looked. He could see the bank watermark, the perforated edges, the clean print. He glanced back toward the manager. "Did you call the issuing bank to verify?" The manager hesitated, then shook his head. "Not yet. We followed protocol and contacted authorities first." "Protocol," Marcus snapped, his composure finally cracking. "Your protocol is to call the cops before even checking? 11 years I've trusted this bank, and the first time I bring in something larger than usual, this is how I'm treated?" Janet, the teller, shifted uncomfortably, her voice trembling. It seemed unusual. People do commit fraud, Sir Marcus turned to her, his eyes sharp, but his voice controlled. And what made me look like a fraud to you? My account history? My ID? Or the color of my hands when I handed you that check? The words hung in the air like a weight no one wanted to touch. The small crowd outside the bank grew restless. A woman muttered, "He's right." Someone else added, "They didn't even check first?" The slimmer officer finally looked at Marcus directly. "You said it was from the sale of a car?" "Yes," Marcus replied, seizing the sliver of opportunity. "A 1978 Buick Regal. It belonged to my father. A man named Charles Whitmore bought it last week. I've got the bill of sale in my glove compartment. You can look right now. My father worked 30 years at a steel plant, and that car was the last thing he left me. I didn't want to sell it, but I needed to. I wanted to set money aside for my niece's college. That check is his payment, not some scam." The slimmer officer's expression shifted. He glanced at his partner, but the heavy-set officer shook his head dismissively. "Doesn't matter. If it checks out, he'll be released later." Marcus's voice rose slightly, not in anger, but in desperation to be heard. "Later? Do you know what it means for me to be seen like this right now? In front of this bank, these cameras, this child standing there, watching me like I'm a criminal? Every second you keep me in these cuffs, you're writing a story about me that isn't true." The boy with the skateboard still stood frozen on the sidewalk, his wide eyes locked on Marcus. The sight of him twisted Marcus's stomach. He thought of Kayla again, and how she might one day see her uncle treated like this. The slimmer officer shifted again, visibly unsettled. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. "If the paperwork's in the car, then check it," Marcus interrupted. His voice carried urgency, but no disrespect. "You've got the power to check right now instead of dragging me off like a suspect." The heavy-set officer's patience thinned. He tightened his grip on Marcus's arm and jerked him closer to the squad car. "Enough talking." Inside the car, Marcus's jaw clenched, but he kept his feet planted. He turned his head, meeting the slimmer officer's gaze one more time. His voice was calm, heavy, and deliberate. "You can either listen to the truth right now, or you can keep pretending you don't hear me. But once I speak, you'll have no choice but to face it." And for the first time, the slimmer officer didn't look away. He nodded slightly, as if ready to hear what Marcus had to say. The heavy-set officer huffed, annoyed that things weren't moving as quickly as he wanted, but the slimmer officer raised a hand, stopping him. "Hold up," he said firmly. "Let's give him a chance to explain." Marcus exhaled, the first sign of relief he'd felt since the cuffs had clicked shut. He shifted slightly, the steel still biting into his wrists. "Thank you," he said quietly. The slimmer officer stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Marcus could hear. "What do you need me to know?" Marcus lifted his chin. His voice was steady, but his words carried years of weight. "I've worked in warehouses since I was 18. I've broken my back to pay bills, to take care of family. I've had an account with this bank for 11 years. Not once have I bounced a check. Not once have I done anything illegal. Today, I brought in a cashier's check. Legit money, clean money, from selling my late father's car. And before anyone even verified it, I was treated like I was lying, like I was stealing. Like I didn't belong here." The slimmer officer's eyes narrowed slightly. He held the check up again, studying it. "You have paperwork for the sale?" "Yes," Marcus answered firmly. "Bill of sale. Buyer's name, phone number, everything. It's in my glove box. Check it, and you'll see I've been telling the truth from the start." The officer gave a slow nod, then turned to his partner. "Let's look before we escalate this." But the heavy-set officer scoffed. "Protocols are clear. We detain, then verify." Marcus spoke up again, louder this time so the crowd could hear. "Protocols shouldn't come before people. If you check right now, you'll see I'm not lying. Why drag me through this when the answer's sitting 30 feet away in my car?" That struck a chord. People in the parking lot started murmuring again. Someone shouted, "Let him prove it." Another voice added, "This doesn't look right." The pressure was shifting. The slimmer officer motioned toward Marcus's car. "Which one's yours?" "The silver Ford Fusion, 2 rows back," Marcus said. The officer nodded and gestured for another officer to retrieve the paperwork. The heavy-set partner rolled his eyes but didn't stop him. As they waited, Marcus continued speaking, his voice calm but powerful, carrying over the flashing lights. "This isn't just about a check. This is about assumptions, about me walking into a bank with money and being treated like I don't deserve to have it. You don't know what it's like to live your life always being second-guessed, always being doubted, no matter how honest you are, no matter how hard you work. You don't know what it's like to walk into a place where you've built trust for over a decade, and still, the first thing they think when they see you with money is fraud. The slimmer officer's jaw tightened, not out of anger toward Marcus, but because the truth of those words landed heavy. Moments later, the officer who went to Marcus's car returned, holding a folded sheet of paper. He handed it to the slimmer officer, who opened it and read carefully. It was the bill of sale, signed, dated, with the buyer's contact information printed at the bottom. The officer looked at Marcus, then back at the paper, then at the check in his hand. He let out a slow breath. "It checks out," he said finally. A wave of silence hit the crowd. The heavy-set officer frowned, clearly irritated. The manager from the bank shifted nervously in the doorway, and Janet looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Marcus stood straighter, the cuffs still biting into his wrists. I told you from the start." The slimmer officer hesitated, then gave a quiet order. "Take the cuffs off." The heavy-set officer muttered under his breath, but obeyed. The moment the metal unlocked, Marcus pulled his wrists forward, rubbing the red marks. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just stared at the people who had doubted him. His silence louder than any outburst could have been, but even with the cuffs off, the damage had been done. The question was, how would anyone make this right? Marcus rubbed his wrists, the faint red imprints a reminder of how quickly trust could be broken. Around him, the flashing lights still painted the pavement, but the crowd's energy had shifted. People weren't whispering about what he might have done anymore. They were shaking their heads at what had been done to him. The slimmer officer handed Marcus the paperwork and the check back. His voice was low, almost apologetic. "It checks out. You're free to go." Marcus stared at him for a moment, then glanced at the heavy-set officer, who avoided eye contact. Finally, he turned toward Janet and the bank manager standing frozen in the doorway. "You see what just happened?" Marcus said, his voice clear enough for everyone to hear. "I walked in here like any other customer. I handed over a legitimate check, and before you even tried to verify it, you pressed a button under your desk. You called the police on me. You treated me like I didn't belong here, like I couldn't possibly have earned what was mine. And now, I'm standing here with my name, my dignity, dragged through the dirt in front of everyone." Janet's lips trembled. The manager adjusted his tie, but neither spoke. The boy with the skateboard still stood there, his eyes locked on Marcus. Marcus met his gaze and softened his voice. "Don't ever let anyone tell you that your worth depends on how they see you. It doesn't. You work hard, you do right. You've got just as much right to be here as anybody else." The boy nodded slowly, almost in awe. Marcus turned back to the slimmer officer. "You listened. You gave me a chance to speak. For that, I respect you. But the truth is, it shouldn't take me begging to be heard. It shouldn't take a crowd watching for someone to finally believe me." The officer nodded once, quietly. There was no defense to give, only a truth to accept. Marcus looked at the manager one last time. "I trusted this bank. That trust is gone now." With that, he slid the check and paperwork back into the envelope, tucked it under his arm, and walked toward his car. The crowd parted for him. Some nodded in support. Others whispered apologies he'd never hear. As he opened his car door, he took one last look at the flashing lights reflecting off the bank's windows. He thought of his father's Buick, of Kayla's future, of the countless times he'd been told to stay calm, to stay patient, to stay polite. He had done all of that. And still, this had happened. He slid into the driver's seat, closed the door, and sat for a long moment, gripping the wheel. His wrists still throbbed, but his resolve was stronger than ever. The lesson was clear. No matter how perfect you try to be, no matter how many rules you follow, there are moments when the world will still question you. The challenge isn't whether you face those moments, it's how you respond. Marcus chose truth over rage, patience over chaos, and in doing so, he forced everyone around him to face what they didn't want to admit. As he drove away, the flashing lights faded in his rearview mirror, but the weight of the moment didn't. He knew he'd carry it with him. And maybe, just maybe, the people who had witnessed it would carry it too. Because sometimes it only takes one moment, one voice, one stand, for others to finally see the truth. So if you're hearing this story right now, ask yourself, when someone is treated unfairly in front of you, will you stay silent or will you speak? Will you follow protocol or will you follow what's right? The choice is yours, and it's a choice you'll face sooner than you think. If this story made you stop and think, don't just move on. Share it. Talk about it. Let it be a reminder that doing right means more than following rules. It means standing up when it matters most.